February 14, 1943, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. Petty Officer First Class Shoichi Sugita stood beside his Mitsubishi A6M0 at Buin Airfield, Bougainville, listening to the intelligence briefing with a mixture of concern and amusement. The briefing officer, a young lieutenant recently arrived from Rabaul, was describing a new American fighter that had appeared over the Solomons. "The aircraft has distinctive bent wings," the officer explained, sketching the inverted gull-wing configuration on a chalkboard. "American designation F4U. Our intelligence suggests it's called Corsair. Initial reports indicate high speed but questionable maneuverability." Sugita, a veteran with 32 victories who had fought since Pearl Harbor, couldn't suppress a laugh. Several other pilots joined him. "Bent wings?" one pilot called out. "What kind of engineer designs a fighter with bent wings?" "It looks like it was damaged in a landing accident." Another pilot added, "The Americans must be desperate if they're sending us aircraft that can't even have straight wings. Perhaps they ran out of proper materials." The mocking continued until the briefing officer, embarrassed but persistent, completed his presentation. The consensus among the veteran Zero pilots was clear. This ugly American fighter with its ridiculous bent wings would be just another victim for Japanese superiority. 8 days later, on February 22nd, Sugita led a formation of 12 Zeros on an escort mission covering bombers attacking Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. At 18,000 feet over the Russell Islands, his wingman called out American fighters approaching from above and ahead. Sugita identified them immediately from the briefing, Corsairs, 4 of them, their distinctive inverted gull wings, making them unmistakable even at distance. "Engage the bent-wing fighters," Sugita ordered, confident that his veteran pilots would make quick work of these ungainly aircraft. He rolled into an attack position, planning to use the Zero's superior maneuverability to get on a Corsair's tail for an easy kill. What happened next shattered every assumption Sugita held about air combat. The lead Corsair, instead of attempting to turn with the Zeros, simply pushed forward into a dive. The acceleration was stunning. The Corsair pulled away from Sugita's Zero as if his aircraft were standing still. Sugita pushed his throttle to war emergency power, but the Corsair was already gone, diving through 15,000 feet while Sugita struggled to follow. Then the Corsair pilot did something Sugita had never seen. He pulled up from the dive into a zoom climb that took him back above the Zeros before Sugita could react. Now the Corsair had altitude, speed, and position advantage. The Corsair rolled into a high-side gun pass, diving on Sugita's formation from above and behind, the worst possible attack angle. Sugita heard his wingman scream a warning, then the hammering roar of 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns firing in unison. Tracers streamed past his canopy, each round traveling at 2,900 feet per second, creating a cone of destruction that his Zero couldn't evade. His wingman's aircraft exploded, hit by a 2-second burst that put approximately 120 half-inch projectiles into the fragile Zero's structure. The fighter disintegrated, wings separating from the fuselage, fuel tanks exploding, pilot killed instantly. Before Sugita could maneuver, the Corsair was gone, using its superior speed to escape before other Zeros could engage. In that moment, as Sugita watched his wingman's burning wreckage spiral toward the ocean, he understood that the bent wings weren't a design flaw, but a solution to problems Japanese engineers hadn't even recognized existed. Those inverted gull wings allowed the massive propeller to clear the deck while keeping the landing gear short and strong. The configuration was brilliant engineering, not desperate improvisation. And those 6.50 caliber machine guns, concentrated in the wings with 2,400 rounds total capacity, represented firepower that could shred any Japanese aircraft in seconds. The Americans hadn't sent them a crippled fighter. They had sent them a weapon that was about to systematically destroy Japanese naval aviation's finest pilots. The story of how the F4U Corsair went from mockery to nightmare for Japanese pilots begins with American recognition that existing fighters were inadequate for Pacific combat. In 1938, the US Navy issued a requirement for a new carrier fighter with performance far exceeding current aircraft. The specification called for maximum speed exceeding 400 miles per hour, far beyond what any carrier fighter had achieved. Chance Volt Aircraft's design team, led by Chief Engineer Rex Beisel, created an aircraft around the most powerful engine available. The Pratt & Whitney R985 Wasp Major Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, producing 2,000 horsepower. The R2800 engine drove the largest propeller ever fitted to a fighter aircraft, 13 feet 4 inches in diameter. This created an immediate problem. To provide adequate ground clearance, the landing gear would need to be impossibly long, creating structural weakness and weight penalties. Beisel's solution was revolutionary: the inverted gull wing. By bending the wing downward at the root, then leveling it outboard, the design allowed the landing gear to be short and strong while still providing propeller clearance. The configuration was aerodynamically efficient, structurally sound, and visually distinctive. It also became the source of initial Japanese mockery that would soon turn to fear. The technical specifications of the F4U Corsair that entered combat in February 1943 revealed why it would dominate Japanese fighters. Maximum speed, 417 miles per hour at 19,900 feet, making it the first American fighter to exceed 400 miles per hour in combat. Rate of climb, 2,890 feet per minute, superior to the Zero's 2,750 feet per minute. Service ceiling, 36,900 feet, giving Corsair pilots the ability to dictate engagement altitude. Range, 1,015 miles, adequate for extended combat patrols. But these performance figures only mattered because the Corsair could fight. The armament package ensured it could kill. 6 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing, provided firepower that exceeded any Japanese fighter. Each gun fired 750 to 850 rounds per minute, generating combined fire rate of approximately 4,800 rounds per minute, or 80 rounds per second. The ammunition load, 400 rounds per gun for a total of 2,400 rounds, provided 30 seconds of continuous fire, or more practically 15 to 20 separate bursts of 1 to 2 seconds each. The guns were mounted outboard in the wings, with convergence set at 300 to 400 yards depending on pilot preference. At convergence range, all 6 gun streams intersected in a small area where any aircraft faced instant structural failure. The .50 caliber projectile itself was already proven in previous fighters, but the Corsair's installation optimized its effectiveness. Each round weighed 1.7 ounces and traveled at 2,900 feet per second muzzle velocity. The standard combat load mixed armor-piercing incendiary, tracer, and ball ammunition in ratios optimized for air combat. The API rounds could penetrate aircraft structures and ignite fuel tanks. The tracer rounds allowed pilots to adjust fire. A 2-second burst put 160 rounds into the convergence zone, enough to destroy any Japanese aircraft through cumulative structural failure and incendiary effect. The Zero pilots who initially mocked the Corsair's bent wings were operating from a position of experience that made their confidence understandable. From Pearl Harbor through mid-1942, the Zero had dominated Pacific air combat through superior maneuverability, experienced pilots and tactical doctrine refined in combat over China. The Zero could complete a 360-degree turn in 16 seconds, faster than any Allied fighter. Japanese pilots knew that if they could force turning combat, they would win. This knowledge had served them well for 18 months. The Corsair would teach them that turning fights were only decisive if your opponent accepted them. The initial combat deployment of the Corsair was troubled, ironically validating Japanese mockery in unexpected ways. The aircraft's long nose created visibility problems during carrier landings. The stiff landing gear caused bouncing that made carrier operations dangerous. Early Corsairs were restricted to land-based operations while these issues were resolved. This meant that initial combat employment was with Marine Corps squadrons operating from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, not Navy carrier squadrons. VMF 124, the 1st Corsair Squadron, began combat operations on February 13, 1943, the day before Sugita's intelligence briefing about the bent-wing fighter. The pilot flying the Corsair that killed Sugita's wingman on February 22nd was 2nd Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh of VMF 124, who would eventually achieve 21 victories and receive the Medal of Honor. Walsh's combat report from that engagement provided the American perspective on the first significant Corsair versus Zero dogfight. We were at 18,000 feet when we spotted approximately 12 Zeros approaching from the northwest. I dove to build speed, reaching approximately 400 miles per hour, then pulled up into a zoom climb. The Zeros couldn't follow. Their pilots tried to turn with me, but I had speed and altitude advantage. I selected a Zero that was attempting to climb and fired a 2-second burst from 300 yards. I observed strikes on the wing root and fuselage. The Zero exploded and fell away in flames. I continued my zoom climb, and the remaining Zeros couldn't engage me effectively. Walsh's tactical approach demonstrated the Corsair doctrine that would destroy Japanese air superiority: never turn with Zeros, use speed and climb to control engagement, attack from altitude with speed advantage, kill with concentrated firepower, disengage before being caught in turning combat. This doctrine, developed through combat experience and systematic analysis, played to every Corsair strength while avoiding situations where Zero advantages mattered. Japanese pilots who had learned to dominate through turning combat suddenly faced an opponent who refused to turn, instead using speed and firepower they couldn't match. The technical advantages Corsair pilots exploited went beyond raw performance numbers. The R2800 engine's 2,000 horsepower provided acceleration that Zero pilots couldn't comprehend. In level flight, the Corsair could pull away from a Zero by 85 miles per hour, fast enough that Japanese pilots couldn't maintain pursuit. In a dive, the Corsair could reach 450 miles per hour, while the Zero's maximum dive speed was approximately 380 miles per hour before structural concerns forced recovery. This meant Corsair pilots could dive away from any engagement they didn't want, while Zero pilots had to commit once combat began because they couldn't catch Corsairs that chose to leave. The combat record of VMF 124 during its first month of Corsair operations revealed the aircraft's potential despite initial mechanical problems and pilot inexperience. From February 13th to March 13th, 1943, the squadron claimed 68 Japanese aircraft destroyed for the loss of 11 Corsairs, a kill ratio of 6.2 to 1. These numbers, while certainly inflated by overclaiming common to all air combat, indicated that even green pilots in an aircraft with known problems were achieving significant success against veteran Japanese pilots in proven fighters. The Corsair's performance advantages were so great that they compensated for American inexperience. Japanese pilot accounts from early Corsair encounters revealed confusion and frustration. The tactics that had worked against Wildcats and P-40s failed against Corsairs. Warrant Officer Takeo Tanemizu, a veteran with 18 victories, described his first Corsair encounter on March 8, 1943. We engaged 4 American fighters with the distinctive bent wings. My flight of 6 Zeros attacked from altitude advantage, but when we dove on them, they simply accelerated away. We couldn't catch them. Then they climbed above us again and attacked from altitude. 1 Zero was shot down in the first pass. The American pilot didn't stay to dogfight, but climbed away again. We couldn't force him to fight on our terms. This is a very dangerous opponent. The psychological impact of facing an aircraft that refused to fight on Japanese terms proved as devastating as the physical casualties. Japanese pilots were trained for offensive combat, aggressive pursuit, and decisive engagement. The Corsair forced defensive thinking, worry about aircraft diving from above, worry about being unable to escape if caught at disadvantage, worry about firepower that killed with single bursts. This psychological shift from hunter to hunted undermined Japanese combat effectiveness as much as actual losses did. The production statistics supporting Corsair operations demonstrated American industrial capacity. Chance Vaught's Stratford, Connecticut plant was producing Corsairs at increasing rates through 1943. By December 1943, monthly production reached 250 aircraft. Goodyear and Brewster began producing Corsairs under license, designated FG and F3A respectively. Total production would eventually reach 12,571 aircraft, making the Corsair one of the most produced American fighters. Each aircraft cost approximately $90,000, expensive but justified by combat effectiveness and pilot survival rates. The ammunition production supporting Corsair operations was equally impressive. Each combat sortie required 2,400 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, plus reserves for training and testing. With hundreds of Corsairs eventually operating across the Pacific, monthly ammunition consumption exceeded 5 million rounds. The Lake City Arsenal and supporting facilities produced this ammunition without strain, demonstrating American industrial depth. Japanese pilots fighting with limited ammunition loads faced opponents who could fire freely, knowing resupply was always available. The evolution of Corsair tactics through 1943 reflected systematic American learning. The thatch weave, developed for Wildcats, was adapted to Corsairs to provide mutual support. The finger four formation provided better visibility and flexibility than the three-plane sections Japanese used. Doctrine emphasized altitude advantage, speed conservation, and coordinated attacks. Most importantly, pilots were drilled never to turn with zeros. If a zero got behind a Corsair, the standard response was to dive away at full throttle using speed the zero couldn't match to escape, then climb back to altitude and re-engage from advantage. By mid-1943, Japanese pilots who had mocked the bent-wing fighter in February were filing reports describing it as their most dangerous opponent. The nickname Japanese pilots gave the Corsair revealed their fear, whistling death, referring to the distinctive sound the aircraft made in high-speed dives caused by air passing through the oil coolers. This sound became psychological warfare, warning Japanese pilots that Corsairs were diving to attack, creating fear before combat even began. The June 16, 1943 air battle over the Russell Islands demonstrated Corsair dominance at scale. 72 Corsairs from multiple Marine squadrons engaged approximately 120 Japanese aircraft, including Zeros and Betty bombers. The Americans claimed 77 Japanese aircraft destroyed for the loss of 6 Corsairs. While overclaiming was certainly present, post-war Japanese records confirmed 43 aircraft lost, still a ratio exceeding 7-1. The battle demonstrated that Corsairs could engage larger Japanese formations and achieve decisive victory through superior performance and tactics. Second Lieutenant James Sweat, flying with VMF 221, achieved 7 confirmed kills during this engagement, all in a single mission, receiving the Medal of Honor. His combat report described the Corsairs' advantages. "I attacked the bomber formation from above, diving through at high speed. The Zeros trying to intercept couldn't catch me. I made multiple passes, each time diving through, firing, then climbing away before Zeros could engage. My 650s destroyed 7 bombers in the passes. The Zeros were frustrated because they couldn't force me to dogfight. I controlled the engagement completely through speed and altitude advantage." The technical refinements incorporated into later Corsair variants addressed early problems while enhancing combat capability. The F4U-1A, entering service in late 1943, featured a raised cockpit, providing better visibility for carrier operations. The stiff landing gear was modified to reduce bounce. These changes eventually made the Corsair suitable for carrier operations, though Marines continued operating land-based Corsairs throughout the war. The F4U-1C variant replaced the .50 caliber machine guns with 420mm AN/M2 cannon, providing even more destructive firepower for pilots who preferred cannon over machine guns. The comparison between Corsair and Zero revealed how completely American industrial philosophy differed from Japanese. The Zero achieved its performance through weight reduction, eliminating armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks. The pilot sat behind no armor plate. Fuel tanks weren't protected against incendiary rounds. This made the Zero extremely light and maneuverable, but vulnerable. A single .50 caliber incendiary round penetrating a fuel tank could destroy the aircraft. Japanese pilots flew knowing they had no margin for error. The Corsair embodied opposite philosophy. The pilot sat behind armor plate that could stop 20mm cannon shells. Fuel tanks were self-sealing, preventing catastrophic fires. The R2800 engine could absorb significant battle damage and continue operating. The airframe was overbuilt by Japanese standards, able to survive damage that would destroy 3 Zeros. This ruggedness meant Corsair pilots survived being shot down at rates approaching 50%, while Zero pilots rarely survived aircraft loss. The cumulative effect was that American pilots gained experience while Japanese pilots died, creating an experience gap that compounded American advantages. The kill ratios achieved by leading Corsair aces revealed the aircraft's lethality in skilled hands. Major Gregory Boyington, leading the famous Black Sheep Squadron VMF-214, achieved 28 victories flying Corsairs between September 1943 and January 1944, when he was shot down and captured. Major Robert Hansen of VMF-215 achieved 25 victories in a 17-day period in January 1944 before being killed. Captain Kenneth Walsh ended the war with 21 victories. These scores weren't achieved through reckless aggression, but through systematic application of Corsair advantages: speed to control engagement, firepower to kill quickly, ruggedness to survive mistakes. The Japanese response to Corsair superiority evolved slowly and inadequately. Some units attempted to avoid combat with Corsairs, engaging only when absolutely necessary. This defensive mindset undermined offensive operations. Other units attempted to develop tactics exploiting Corsair weaknesses, but the fundamental problem remained. If Corsair pilots followed doctrine and refused turning combat, Japanese advantages became irrelevant. The few times Corsairs were shot down usually involved pilot error, mechanical failure, or being caught at significant disadvantage, not Japanese tactical superiority. The transformation from Japanese mockery to terror reached its zenith during the Rabaul campaign of late 1943. Rabaul, Japan's primary base in the Southwest Pacific, housed over 300 aircraft and was defended by some of Japan's best remaining pilots. When Marine Corsair squadrons began systematic attacks on Rabaul in October 1943, Japanese commanders expected their numerical superiority and veteran pilots to overwhelm the Americans. Instead, they witnessed their finest aviators systematically destroyed by aircraft they had dismissed as poorly designed bent-wing fighters 8 months earlier. November 11, 1943, became known as Black Thursday in Japanese naval aviation records. 70 Corsairs from multiple Marine squadrons attacked Rabaul Harbor and airfields. They were met by approximately 100 defending Zeros. The resulting air battle lasted 90 minutes and demonstrated complete Corsair superiority. Major Gregory Boyington, leading VMF-214, described the engagement. "We came in at 20,000 feet, Zeros climbing to meet us, but we had altitude and speed advantage. We dove through their formation, each of us selecting targets. My 650s shredded a Zero in one burst. I climbed away, selected another target, dove again. The Zeros couldn't keep up with our tactics. They tried to turn with us, but we never accepted turning combat. We dictated every engagement." The results of November 11th shocked Japanese commanders. American claims totaled 48 Japanese aircraft destroyed. Post-war Japanese records confirmed 26 aircraft lost, with another 15 damaged beyond repair. American losses were 4 Corsairs, 1 to ground fire, 3 to aerial combat. The kill ratio exceeded 10 to 1. More significantly, several veteran Japanese pilots with 10-plus victories were killed, losses Japan couldn't replace. The psychological impact was devastating. Japanese pilots who survived reported feeling helpless against opponents who controlled every aspect of combat through superior performance. Petty Officer Shoichi Sugita, who had laughed at the bent-wing fighter in February, filed a combat report after surviving the November 11th engagement that revealed complete psychological defeat. The American Corsairs attacked from altitude with speed we cannot match. When we attempted to engage, they simply dove away, then climbed back above us. Their 6 machine guns destroy our aircraft with single bursts. I watched 3 wingmen die today, all shot down by Corsairs before they could maneuver defensively. The bent-wing fighter we mocked is actually brilliantly designed. Those wings allow short landing gear with large propeller, optimal engineering we failed to understand. Our mockery was ignorance, now we die from that ignorance. The technical sophistication of Corsair operations by late 1943 reflected systematic American refinement. The K-14 computing gun sight, introduced in late models, automatically calculated lead for deflection shots. The pilot simply kept the target in the sight, and the computing mechanism adjusted the reticle to show proper aim point. This technology, combined with the Corsair's stable gun platform, made American gunnery devastatingly accurate. Japanese pilots flying with primitive ring and bead sights faced opponents with computing sights that essentially automated the hardest part of air combat gunnery. The ammunition innovations further enhanced Corsair lethality. By 1944, American .50 caliber ammunition included improved API rounds with more reliable incendiary compounds. The M8 APIT round, introduced in 1944, combined armor-piercing capability with tracer and incendiary effects in a single projectile. These rounds could penetrate, mark trajectory, and ignite in one package. A typical Corsair combat load of 2,400 rounds included 60% M8A PIT, 20% M2 ball, and 20% M1 tracer. This mix provided visual feedback for aim correction while maximizing destructive effect on target. The carrier operations that began in April 1944 expanded Corsair deployment beyond marine land-based squadrons. The F4U variants improved visibility, and landing characteristics made carrier operations practical. VF-17, the Navy's first carrier-based Corsair squadron, began operations from USS Bunker Hill in April 1944. The squadron's commander, Lieutenant Commander John Blackburn, developed carrier-specific tactics that exploited the Corsair's advantages while adapting to shipboard constraints. Within 3 months, VF-17 had claimed 154 aerial victories for the loss of 15 aircraft, a ratio exceeding 10 to 1. The Battle of the Philippine Sea on June 19 to 20, 1944, provided the ultimate demonstration of Corsair effectiveness in carrier operations. Known to American pilots as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, the battle saw approximately 450 Japanese carrier aircraft attack the American fleet. They faced 891 defending American fighters, including 76 Corsairs. The Japanese attack was annihilated. American pilots claimed 402 aerial victories over 2 days. Post-war analysis confirmed approximately 330 Japanese aircraft destroyed. Corsair squadrons claimed 72 victories, proportionally higher than their representation in the defending force. Lieutenant Junior Grade Alexander Vrasiu of VF-16, flying from USS Lexington, achieved 6 kills in 8 minutes on June 19th, all against Japanese dive bombers. His combat report captured Corsair advantages. I intercepted a formation of Judy dive bombers at 12,000 feet. The first one I engaged exploded from a 2-second burst. The Judy couldn't maneuver away from my attacks. My Corsair was faster, could outclimb them, and my 650s destroyed each target with 1 or 2 bursts. I shot down 6 before running out of ammunition. If I'd had more ammo, I could have shot down more. They had no defense against a properly flown Corsair. The Japanese pilot experience at Philippine Sea revealed complete air combat inferiority. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, one of the few surviving Japanese pilots, described the battle. "We were massacred. The American fighters were everywhere, and we couldn't evade them. The Corsairs with bent wings were particularly deadly. They dove on us from altitude with speed that made evasion impossible. Their machine guns destroyed our aircraft instantly. I saw perhaps 30 aircraft shot down in the first 10 minutes. We never reached the American carriers. The combat air patrol destroyed us long before we could attack. I survived by fleeing at low altitude, but most of my comrades died." The strategic impact of Philippine Sea extended beyond the immediate battle. Japanese carrier aviation effectively ceased to exist after the battle. The 330 aircraft lost represented not just machines, but irreplaceable pilots. Japan had begun the war with approximately 3,500 trained carrier pilots. By June 1944, fewer than 500 remained. The losses at Philippine Sea reduced this to perhaps 200 combat-ready pilots, insufficient to operate even the surviving carriers. The Corsair, along with Hellcats and other American fighters, had destroyed Japanese naval aviation as an effective fighting force. The psychological warfare aspect of Corsair operations was deliberate and effective. The distinctive whistling sound in high-speed dives became associated with imminent death among Japanese pilots. Some Japanese units reported pilots freezing or breaking formation when the whistle was heard, even before Corsairs were visible. This Pavlovian fear response, conditioned by months of combat where the whistle preceded devastating attacks, proved as debilitating as actual losses. Psychological casualties rendered pilots ineffective even if physically unharmed. The introduction of the F4U variant with 420mm cannon provided even more destructive firepower for pilots who mastered cannon gunnery. The AN-M 220mm cannon fired explosive shells at 650 rounds per minute per gun, giving total fire rate of 2,600 rounds per minute. While slower rate of fire than .50 caliber machine guns, the 20mm shells were far more destructive per hit. A single 20mm hit could destroy a zero through explosive effect. The trade-off was reduced ammunition capacity, 231 rounds per gun versus 400 rounds per gun for .50 caliber, requiring more precise gunnery. Major Archie Donahue of VMF 451, one of the highest-scoring cannon-armed Corsair pilots, described the 20mm advantage. The cannons required better shooting because you had less ammunition and slower rate of fire. But when you hit, the target was finished. 1 or 2 20mm hits destroyed any Japanese fighter. I preferred the cannons because they killed reliably with minimal exposure time. Get in range, fire a short burst, target destroyed, disengage. The explosive effect was far greater than .50 caliber, which sometimes required sustained fire for kills. The Battle of Okinawa from April to June 1945 demonstrated Corsair dominance in the war's final major campaign. Approximately 400 Corsairs operated from carriers and captured airfields, providing combat air patrol against kamikazes and conventional attacks. The Marine and Navy Corsair squadrons claimed 644 aerial victories during the 3-month campaign. The effectiveness against kamikazes was particularly notable. Kamikazes required only 1 hit to kill, making the Corsairs' concentrated firepower ideal. Pilots could destroy kamikazes from ranges where conventional bombers couldn't return fire. Captain Kenneth Reuser of VMF 323 described kamikaze interception. The kamikazes were determined but not particularly skilled. They flew straight courses toward the fleet, making them easy targets for Corsairs with altitude advantage. I'd dive on them from above, fire a 2 to 3 second burst, and the kamikaze would disintegrate. The 650s put so many rounds into the target that structural failure was instant. I shot down 11 kamikazes during Okinawa. None of them reached our ships. The Corsair's speed let us intercept far from the fleet, and the firepower ensured kills before they could react. The statistical summary of Corsair effectiveness compiled from combat records revealed unprecedented fighter performance. From February 1943 to August 1945, Corsairs claimed 2,140 aerial victories in combat. Losses to all causes, including accidents and ground fire, totaled 189 aircraft in air-to-air combat. This produced an overall kill ratio of 11.3 to 1, the highest of any American fighter aircraft. The ratio varied by theater and period, reaching as high as 15 to 1 during some campaigns, but consistently exceeded 10 to 1 throughout the war. The individual ace scores achieved in Corsairs demonstrated the aircraft's lethality. 22 pilots achieved ace status in a single day flying Corsairs. 46 pilots achieved 10 or more victories. 7 pilots exceeded 20 victories. These scores weren't achieved through prolonged service but through systematic application of Corsair advantages. Major Robert Hansen achieved 25 victories in 17 days of combat before being killed. This rate of success, 1.47 victories per combat day, indicated that skilled pilots in Corsairs could achieve devastating effectiveness, limited only by target availability. The Japanese ace community, which had begun the war with confidence bordering on arrogance, was systematically destroyed by Corsairs and other American fighters. By 1945, most surviving Japanese aces had been relegated to training duties or homeland defense, removed from frontline combat because their experience was too valuable to risk in battles Japan was losing. Those who continued fighting faced overwhelming odds. Warrant Officer Saburo Sakai, Japan's third-ranking ace, described late-war combat. By 1945, the Americans had complete air superiority. Their Corsairs and Hellcats outnumbered us 5 or 10 to 1. More critically, their pilots were well-trained and flew superior aircraft. We couldn't turn with them because they wouldn't turn with us. We couldn't run because they were faster. We couldn't outclimb them. Every engagement was survival, not victory. The bent-wing Corsair was our most feared opponent because it combined speed, firepower, and ruggedness we couldn't match. The technical comparison between Corsair and Zero revealed fundamental philosophical differences. The Zero achieved 1,100 horsepower from its Sakai engine to power an aircraft weighing 5,300 pounds loaded, producing power-to-weight ratio of 0.21 horsepower per pound. The Corsair achieved 2,000 horsepower from its R2800 to power an aircraft weighing 12,000 pounds loaded, producing power-to-weight ratio of 0.17 horsepower per pound. Despite lower power-to-weight, the Corsair was faster, climbed as well, and had superior high-altitude performance due to the R2800's superior supercharging. The American approach of overwhelming power proved more effective than Japanese minimalist weight reduction. The production statistics supporting Corsair operations demonstrated American industrial dominance. Total Corsair production reached 12,571 aircraft from 3 manufacturers. Chance Vought produced 7,829 aircraft. Goodyear produced 4,006 FG-1 variants. Brewster produced 735 F4U variants before contract cancellation due to quality problems. Peak monthly production in 1945 reached 440 aircraft. Each aircraft required approximately 22,000 man-hours to construct, representing 275 million total man-hours for the program. This industrial commitment produced a weapon that killed Japanese pilots faster than Japan could train replacements. The ammunition production supporting Corsair operations exceeded 500 million rounds of .50 caliber during the war. Each combat sortie consumed an average of 400 rounds, meaning 2,400 round combat load provided ammunition for multiple engagements. The Lake City Arsenal's production capacity of 30 million rounds monthly meant that ammunition supply never constrained Corsair operations. By contrast, Japanese ammunition production by 1945 was so limited that pilots were sometimes restricted to 50 rounds per gun for training, creating pilots who arrived in combat having barely fired their weapons. The human cost of Corsair effectiveness was measured in Japanese casualties that Japan couldn't replace. Conservative estimates suggest Corsairs destroyed approximately 2,000 Japanese aircraft, assuming 50% overclaiming in American records. Each destroyed aircraft represented a pilot killed or wounded, usually killed because Japanese pilots rarely survived aircraft loss. At average training cost of $50,000 per pilot and 800 training hours, Japan lost $100 million in training investment plus irreplaceable human capital. American losses of 189 Corsairs in air combat represented 1,134 potential casualties assuming six-man crews, but actual casualties were lower due to survival rates exceeding 50%. The post-war assessment by Japanese naval aviation revealed complete acknowledgement of Corsair superiority. A 1946 study by surviving Japanese naval aviation staff concluded, "The American F4U Corsair represented the most effective enemy fighter we encountered in the Pacific War. Its combination of speed, climb rate, firepower, and structural strength made it superior to all Japanese fighters in every combat scenario, except sustained turning combat. American pilots were trained to avoid turning combat, negating our single advantage. The distinctive inverted gull-wing design we initially mocked proved to be brilliant engineering that allowed optimal propeller size with minimal landing gear length. Our initial derision revealed our failure to understand American design philosophy." Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, architect of the kamikaze program, explained his decision to adopt suicide tactics, partly as response to conventional combat futility. By late 1944, our pilots could not defeat American fighters in normal combat. Corsairs and Hellcats outperformed our aircraft, and our pilots were inadequately trained. Conventional attacks on American carriers were being annihilated by combat air patrol before reaching targets. The only method that could not be defeated by superior American fighters was suicide attack, where determination rather than skill determined success. This desperate tactic was necessary because we had no other way to damage American forces given their air superiority. The Corsair's continued service after World War II testified to its effectiveness. The aircraft remained in production until 1952, with later variants featuring upgraded R2800 engines producing 2,450 horsepower. Corsairs saw extensive combat in Korea, where they performed primarily ground attack missions but occasionally engaged North Korean aircraft. The last Corsair combat mission occurred in 1969, when Honduran Corsairs fought in the football war against El Salvador. This 26-year combat career, from 1943 to 1969, represented extraordinary longevity for a World War II fighter design. The legacy of the bent-wing fighter extended beyond combat records to influence post-war aviation design. The inverted gull wing, while not widely adopted due to structural complexity, demonstrated that unconventional configurations could solve real problems elegantly. The Corsair's philosophy of overwhelming power and ruggedness over minimal weight influenced American fighter design through the jet age. The emphasis on pilot protection, structural strength, and concentrated firepower became hallmarks of American fighter aircraft that continued through F-86, F-4, and F-15 designs. The individual stories of Japanese pilots who survived encounters with Corsairs revealed the profound psychological impact. Petty Officer Shoichi Sugita, who had laughed at the bent wings in February 1943, survived the war with 70 victories but described the Corsair as his most feared opponent. "I learned to respect the bent-wing fighter after my first combat against it." The design we mocked was actually superior engineering we couldn't match. Those wings allowed the Americans to mount a huge propeller that gave their aircraft speed and climb we couldn't counter. The 6 machine guns killed with reliability that made every engagement potentially fatal. I survived the war by learning to avoid Corsairs when possible and fight them defensively when unavoidable. Offensive combat against Corsairs was suicide. The final air combat kill of the Pacific War involving a Corsair occurred on August 15, 1945, the day Japan announced surrender. Captain Kenneth Rooser of VMF 323 flying from USS Lexington intercepted a formation of Japanese aircraft apparently unaware of the surrender announcement. Rooser shot down one aircraft before breaking off upon receiving radio notification of the ceasefire. This final kill brought the Corsairs' World War II aerial victory total to 2,140 confirmed, the highest total of any American fighter operating from carrier bases. The meeting between former adversaries decades after the war revealed mutual respect earned through combat. In 1976, at a reunion of Pacific War aviators in San Diego, Shoichi Sugita met Kenneth Walsh, the pilot who had killed Sugita's wingman on February 22, 1943. The two men, now in their 60s, discussed that engagement with the perspective of age and peace. Sugita told Walsh, "When I first saw your Corsair with its bent wings, I thought you Americans had designed a clumsy fighter. I was wrong. You had designed a brilliant fighter that our doctrine couldn't counter. That bent-wing fighter killed many of my friends. Today I can say it was an honor to fight against such a superior aircraft. You won because your country produced better aircraft and trained pilots better. We fought bravely, but lost completely." Walsh responded with equal respect. "Your Zero was the most maneuverable fighter we faced. In a turning fight, you had advantage. But the Corsair gave us the ability to refuse turning combat. We could fight on our terms because our aircraft was faster and more powerful. That's not Japanese failure, that's American industrial capacity producing a weapon optimized for how we needed to fight. You pilots were brave and skilled. You lost because our system produced better tools, not because you were inferior warriors." This exchange between men who had tried to kill each other 33 years earlier captured the essential truth about Corsair versus Zero combat. Japanese pilots were as brave and initially more skilled than American pilots. But the Corsair gave Americans advantages that skill couldn't overcome. Speed meant Americans controlled engagement. Firepower meant Americans killed reliably. Ruggedness meant Americans survived mistakes. These advantages, products of American industrial capacity and design philosophy, proved decisive regardless of individual pilot quality. The story of the Corsair is ultimately the story of how American military aviation matured from defensive desperation in 1941 to 1942 to complete dominance by 1944 to 1945. The aircraft that Japanese pilots mocked in February 1943 for its bent wings became the weapon that destroyed Japanese naval aviation's ability to contest American air superiority. The inverted gull wing, source of initial derision, represented exactly the kind of engineering sophistication required to win modern war, identifying problems, creating innovative solutions, and producing weapons at scale that enemies couldn't match. The mathematical elegance of the Corsair's success was undeniable. Kill ratio 11.3 to 1, total victories 2,140, production total 12,571 aircraft, service life 26 years from first combat to final combat mission. These numbers represented more than statistics. They represented the transformation of American fighter aviation from defensive parity to offensive dominance. Every Japanese pilot who died before 6 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, every Zero shredded by 160 half-inch projectiles in a 2-second burst, every engagement where speed and climb rate decided outcome before maneuvering mattered, demonstrated that American industrial capacity combined with intelligent design could produce weapons that skill alone couldn't defeat. Shoichi Sugita lived until 1989, long enough to see the Corsair enshrined in museums as one of World War II's iconic fighters. In a 1987 interview, he reflected on his February 1943 mockery of the bent-wing fighter. "We laughed at those wings because we didn't understand them. We thought good fighters needed to look conventionally beautiful, but the Americans understood that good fighters needed to work effectively, and if that required unconventional design, they would design unconventionally. Those bent wings allowed them to build a fighter that was faster, more powerful, and more deadly than anything we could produce." Our laughter died the first time we fought Corsairs. After that, we only felt fear when we heard that distinctive whistle signaling a Corsair diving to attack. The bent wings weren't a flaw. They were brilliance we couldn't comprehend until they killed us. The legacy endures in every air museum where Corsairs are displayed, in the memories of pilots who flew them and pilots who fought them, and in the aviation design philosophy that unconventional solutions to real problems often prove superior to conventional approaches. The F4U Corsair, with its distinctive inverted gull wings that Japanese pilots mocked before those same pilots died from 6.50 caliber machine guns, stands as testament to American industrial warfare at its most effective, identifying advantages, engineering solutions, producing at scale, and applying with devastating precision until the enemy could no longer resist. When Japanese pilots laughed at the Corsair's bent wings, they were laughing at their own coming defeat. Those wings carried guns that would tear apart not just aircraft, but the entire structure of Japanese air superiority. The laughter died in flames over the Solomons, Rabaul, the Philippines, and Okinawa, replaced by the hammering roar of 6.50 caliber Brownings, delivering 80 rounds per second, each round carrying death at 2,900 feet per second, each second bringing Japanese naval aviation closer to complete destruction. The bent-wing fighter they mocked became the weapon that broke them. And in the end, the mockery belonged to history, while the Corsair belonged to legend.